Hey everyone! Today we're diving into one of the most intense and unique crusades in history, the Albigensian Crusade, also known as the Cather Crusade. This was a brutal campaign led by Pope Innocent III back in the early 1200s, with the aim of wiping out a group called the Cathars in southern France, specifically in the Languedoc region. But this wasn't just a military battle. It was as much about religious and political power as it was about faith. So, who were the Cathars? They were followers of a reform movement that had pretty radical beliefs for the time. They came from a tradition in the Balkans and rejected materialism altogether. To the Cathars, the physical world was something evil, created by a dark force they called the Rex Mundi, or King of the World. They believed in two opposing spiritual forces, a purely good, loving God of spirit, and an evil entity responsible for everything physical and corrupt in the world. This outlook put them at odds with the Catholic Church on nearly every major doctrine, especially ideas about Jesus and the sacraments. The Catholic clergy saw the Cathars as a direct threat. To the Church, the Cathars were dangerous heretics. To the people, they were sometimes just a mysterious, alternative spiritual group. The Church condemned them in various councils over the years, and by the time of Pope Innocent III, it was clear that no amount of diplomacy was going to make them disappear. When one of the Pope's representatives was murdered, someone the Pope suspected was silenced by a local count who supported the Cathars. Innocent III decided it was time to take action. In 1209, he declared an official crusade, calling on French nobles to join the fight. In exchange, he offered them lands that would be seized from the Cather heretics. This crusade wasn't just about crushing heresy. It became a power struggle for territory and influence, especially for the French crown. The Crusaders made rapid progress initially, taking over Cather lands and weakening their influence. But the struggle wasn't over. Between 1215 and 1225, the Cathars managed to rise up and reclaim some of their lost territories. Eventually, though, the renewed crusades and relentless persecution drove Catharism underground. This crusade also had a lasting impact on the Catholic Church itself. It led to the establishment of the Dominican order, whose members took up preaching to counter heretical beliefs directly, and also played a role in creating the medieval Inquisition. This infamous institution was tasked with rooting out heresy, with Catharism as one of its primary targets. By the 1300s, Catharism was almost completely erased from the region, and some historians even view the Albigensian Crusade as an act of genocide against the Cather population. As for Cather beliefs, they were pretty unique. The word Cather itself comes from a Greek term meaning pure. Their faith was rooted in a form of dualism, the belief in two powerful opposing forces, one good, one evil. They saw the physical world, including human bodies, as fundamentally corrupt. According to their teachings, Jesus wasn't born in a physical body but was more like a divine spirit who came to teach. They also believed in concepts like the transmigration of souls passing from one body to another in a cycle. And unlike Catholics, they saw church hierarchy as corrupt and unnecessary. Anyone could perform religious rites, not just priests. Their practices were equally distinct. Cathars had a ritual called the consolamentum, a form of spiritual baptism that could only be received once in a lifetime and often right before death. This ritual was supposed to purify the soul entirely, freeing it from the cycle of rebirth. After receiving the consolamentum, some Cathars chose to fast completely, relying only on water until they passed away, a ritual sacrifice of the body to ensure the soul's salvation. And now let's dive right back into the scene in Languedoc, a region that, back then, was culturally and politically unlike any other part of medieval Europe. Known as Occitania to its people, it wasn't really considered French by today's standards. In fact, the locals spoke a language called Occitan, closer to Catalan than to French, and they saw themselves as distinct from their northern neighbors. This area was essentially a patchwork of small territories, each controlled by its own local lords. And here's something interesting. Toulouse was the main city, a bustling hub that had already grown to about 30,000 people by the early 13th century. Despite this population, the Count of Toulouse, who technically ruled the city, had very limited authority. The city enjoyed a level of independence that was rare for its time. Surrounding villages and towns were built with a focus on defense, strategically placed on hillsides or near cliffs, enclosed within thick, sturdy walls. Now, this urban character of Languedoc wasn't just physical, it influenced social attitudes too. People here were far more open to different beliefs, especially compared to their counterparts in the more rural northern regions. For instance, Jewish communities faced little discrimination, and although Muslims didn't receive the same tolerance, there was still a measure of respect for their scholarly contributions. But here's where things get really intriguing. There was an almost palpable cultural divide between the north and south of what we now call France. In a nutshell, Northerners saw Southerners as indulgent, soft, and overly influenced by intellectuals and businessmen. On the flip side, Southerners considered the Northerners brash, unsophisticated, and pushy. This cultural friction would later fuel the intensity of conflicts between the two regions. Amid this complex social tapestry, the Cathars emerged as a significant spiritual force. They weren't the only ones though. Other movements across Europe were also challenging the Catholic Church's authority, seeking a return to the early simpler Christian beliefs of the apostles. The Cathars, however, held a unique view. They believed in a dualistic philosophy, a radical perspective that set them apart from other dissenters like the Waldensians, who shared some of the Cathars' criticisms of the Church but not their dualistic theology. These Cather beliefs spread widely, especially in the Languedoc. The region's culture of tolerance allowed the movement to flourish, and soon the Cathars became a sizable presence. However, the Church couldn't ignore this alternative faith much longer, especially as it gained followers in other areas like Lombardy. This growth wasn't just a matter of popularity, it was also a reaction to the widespread dissatisfaction with the clergy, who were often perceived as corrupt or even morally lacking. By the time Pope Innocent III took charge in 1198, the Church was fully aware of the Cathars' increasing influence. He immediately sent preachers into Languedoc to address the situation, hoping to bring the Cathars back into the fold. But instead of converting the people, these preachers met resistance. To make things worse, the powerful nobles of Languedoc were less inclined to support the Church, especially when it meant risking their own independence from the French crown. Among these nobles was Raymond Vai, the Count of Toulouse, who was somewhat sympathetic to the Cather cause and openly defied the Church's authority. The tension kept rising. Raymond's defiance eventually led to his excommunication in 1207, an act that essentially left his lands under a religious curse. But this didn't stop him. Instead, he continued to resist church control, and the conflict only escalated when one of his knights allegedly murdered a papal envoy. In response, Pope Innocent III excommunicated Raymond again, releasing his subjects from their loyalty to him and rallying support for what would soon be one of the bloodiest crusades on European soil, the Albigensian Crusade. And the initial campaigns of the Albigensian Crusade set a brutal precedent, beginning in mid-1209 when around 10,000 crusaders assembled in Lyon and then advanced southward. While some came from as far as England and Austria, a significant number were French. Many stayed only briefly, their 40-day crusader commitment leading to a rotating force rather than a single steady army. Leadership was ambiguous at the outset. King Philip II of France, cautious of an alliance between King John of England and Holy Roman Emperor Otto IV, declined to lead but provided troops, reserving influence over the outcome. With no king to command, the responsibility fell to papal legate Arnaud Amalric, the abbot from Citeaux Abbey, who would set a relentless tone. As crusaders mobilized, Raymond Vai, the Count of Toulouse, attempted a defense pact with his nephew Raymond Roger Tronquevel, who ruled Bizer and Carcassonne. But Raymond Roger refused, and Raymond had no choice but to seek reconciliation with the Church. Despite opposition from Amalric, Raymond's repentance was accepted, granting him protection from attack. That left the Crusaders with Raymond Roger's lands, which included towns like Albi and Carcassonne, where Cathar communities thrived. By late June, the Crusaders marched from Lyon, reaching Montpellier a month later. A known tolerance of Catharism in Raymond Roger's territory made him an inevitable target, despite his denials and protestations of innocence. With a mere 24 years, he claimed his youth excused him from responsibility, but his plea was rejected. The Crusaders' first target was Bizer. On July 21, 1209, they besieged the town, demanding the Catholic residents leave and the Cathars surrender. No one did, and the city was breached the next day. Once inside, the Crusaders unleashed a massacre, slaughtering virtually everyone regardless of faith. Legend claims that Amalric, when asked how to distinguish Cathars from Catholics, answered, "Kill them all. God will know his own." This brutal phrase may be apocryphal, but it reflects the Crusaders' merciless zeal. In their report to the Pope, Amalric and Milo, another church figure, claimed the slaughter reached 20,000. Although this was likely an exaggeration, the message was clear: the crusade would show no mercy. News of Bizer's fate struck terror across the region, and towns quickly surrendered or evacuated to avoid a similar fate. The Crusaders faced no resistance as they advanced toward Carcassonne, a city known for its Cathar ties. They arrived on August 1, 1209, and within days cut off the city's water supply. Despite Raymond Roger's attempts to negotiate, he was captured under dubious circumstances, and Carcassonne fell on August 15. Its citizens were spared from slaughter, but forced to leave in minimal clothing. In the months that followed, surrounding towns like Albi, Castelnaudary, and Fanjeaux fell quickly, with many surrendering without a fight. In December, the Crusaders turned to Lasters in the castle of Cabaret. Led by Pierre Roger de Cabaret, the defenders successfully repelled the attack, forcing a winter hiatus in the campaign. When the crusade resumed in 1210, Simon de Montfort, now leading the Crusaders, initiated a series of sieges against strategic towns with Cathar ties. At Bram in March and Minerve in June, he pressed forward with brutal consistency. At Minerve, despite the city's lack of military importance, Simon's bombardment destroyed the main well, forcing the town's surrender. Though he initially sought leniency, Amalric demanded punishment for the Cathars. Cather perfects those who refuse to renounce their beliefs, were offered a choice to convert or die. Only 3 recanted. The rest, numbering around 140, were burned alive. Next, Simon's forces laid siege to Termes in August. Despite an intense rainstorm that temporarily replenished the defenders' water, Termes eventually surrendered. As winter set in, the Crusaders took a brief pause. By spring of 1211, Amalric's harsh methods alienated several local lords, including Raymond VI of Toulouse, who was excommunicated once again. The following year, they returned to assault Lavaur. When reinforcements joined from across Europe, it emboldened Raymond Roger of Foix to launch a surprise attack, resulting in the ambush and near total slaughter of 6,000 Crusaders at Montguy. In the ensuing months, Simon continued to capture castles and eliminate resistance, with the Cathars facing ruthless repression. Montferrand, where Raymond had stationed his brother Baldwin, soon fell. After negotiating his surrender, Baldwin briefly returned to Raymond, only to later join Simon's ranks. By 1212, Simon closed in on Toulouse, surrounding the city and stifling Raymond's allies and resources. The crusade was tightening its grip. Desperate for aid, Raymond reached out to Peter II of Aragon, who, despite his loyalty to the church, was linked to Toulouse through family ties. Peter attempted to sway the church to halt the crusade, arguing that Raymond deserved absolution and peace in Languedoc. Initially, Pope Innocent III seemed to consider it, rebuking Simon and scaling back the Crusaders' privileges. Yet Peter's call to restore Raymond's lands met fierce opposition. When he saw his plea rejected, Peter decided to intervene by force. In September 1213, Peter and Simon clashed at the Battle of Morray. Peter's coalition outnumbered the Crusaders, but Simon's strategic acumen turned the tide. In a decisive maneuver, Simon's forces outflanked Peter, and Peter was killed in the fray. The coalition collapsed, dealing a crippling blow to the resistance in Toulouse. By the end of 1214, the situation for Raymond grew dire. Simon, now fortified by new victories and land grants, pressed onward. As Raymond fled to England and other regional forces dwindled, Simon's influence spread unchallenged. And it's now April 1216. Raymond Vai, along with his son, Raymond VII, returns with a renewed sense of purpose. They manage to rally a force from towns eager to defy the crusading power, setting their sights on Beaucaire. By May, they have the town under siege, and after 3 grueling months, the defenders, supplies dwindling and hope fading, agree to surrender the castle, but on one condition: they can leave with their arms. Montfort's efforts to break through and relieve the besieged town fail, marking a significant setback. Adding to the turmoil, Pope Innocent III dies unexpectedly in July, leaving the crusade leaderless and momentarily in disarray. Command shifts to Philip II of France, a man less eager for relentless pursuit of heretics. Philip has his hands full with ongoing conflicts against King John of England, pulling his attention away from the Albigensian Crusade. Meanwhile, Montford is facing fresh resistance in the south. In Toulouse, tensions flare into open revolt, and he's forced to put down the uprising before turning west to secure Bizer. But in December of 1216, Montfort meets fierce resistance at Lourdes and is driven back. This is just the beginning of the counter-push led by Raymond Vai and his son. By September of the following year, while Montfort is occupied in the Foix region, Raymond VII reclaims Toulouse without bloodshed. Montfort rushes back, yet his forces are too few to wrestle back control of the city. Pope Honorius III, keen to revive the failing crusade, rallies new support and renews the Crusaders' privileges, drawing them back into the fight. But as Montfort attempts to retake Toulouse in the spring of 1218, he meets an untimely end. On June 25th, some accounts say June 29th, Montfort is struck by a massive stone hurled from a defensive machine, one that, according to popular lore, was manned by the women and young girls of Toulouse. With Montfort gone, the Crusaders are forced to retreat, and Toulouse remains in the hands of its defenders. The loss triggers Pope Honorius III to restore full indulgences to the Crusaders, aiming to invigorate the campaign. King Philip II still doesn't join in person, but he dispatches his reluctant son, Prince Louis, to lead a new force southward. Joined by Amaury de Montfort, Louis lays siege to Marmande in June 1219. Once Marmande falls, nearly everyone inside is massacred, save for the commander and his knights. They march on to Toulouse, but after 6 weeks of unsuccessful siege, the crusading forces are forced to abandon the city and head home, leaving Amaury too weak to hold the captured lands. By 1220, Raymond VII, with relentless resolve, manages to reclaim all lost territories. In the wake of these events, Amaury de Montfort realizes his losses. In 1224 he abandons Carcassonne and cedes his remaining lands to King Louis VIII. The Council of Bourges, held in 1225, tackles the Cathar heresy once more. Despite their efforts, Raymond VII is excommunicated just as his father was. The council imposes a new tax, the Albigensian tenth, aimed at funding the crusade, hoping to lend it permanence. Yet these broader financial reforms falter. Louis VIII, determined to finish what his predecessors started, takes up the cross in 1226. Gathering the largest force yet seen in this campaign, he sets out that June. The Crusaders reclaim Bizer, Carcassonne, and other strongholds without much opposition until they reach Avignon. This city stands firm against Louis, determined to resist. Following a prolonged siege and fierce fighting, Avignon surrenders in early September on the condition of demolishing its fortifications, sparing the city from looting and death. Just 2 months later, in November, Louis VIII dies, passing the crown to his son, the young Louis IX. His mother, Queen Blanche of Castile, takes over as regent and commands the Crusades' continuation. Through 1228, the Crusaders lay waste to the lands surrounding Toulouse, burning fields, ripping out vineyards, and leaving destruction in their wake. The city eventually falls, with Raymond VII powerless to intervene. Queen Blanche, ever the strategist, offers Raymond a deal to retain his rule over Toulouse. He must agree to oppose the Cathars, return church properties, and marry his daughter Joan to Louis IX's brother, Alphonse of Poitiers. Reluctantly, Raymond signs the Treaty of Paris at Meaux on April 12, 1229, ceding his lands into the future control of the French crown. With the military campaign winding down, a new chapter begins, the Inquisition. Established in 1234 under Pope Gregory IX, the Inquisition targets heretical movements, including the dwindling Cathars. By enforcing punishments ranging from the wearing of yellow crosses to public penance, imprisonment, and even executions by fire, the Inquisition works to root out the remnants of the Cathar movement. Raymond VII's last attempt to resist comes in 1242, but it ends in failure, and Catharism's decline is sealed in 1244 after a brutal siege at Montsegur. There, over 200 Cathar prefects are burned in a mass execution at the foot of the fortress. Despite this crushing blow, small groups of Cathar followers continue to practice in secrecy, evading the Inquisition's reach. By 1350, the Cathar faith as a public movement is all but extinguished, ending a turbulent chapter in the history of medieval France. In the centuries that follow, scholars and historians continue to debate the nature of this campaign, with some, like Raphael Lemkin, even describing it as one of the earliest instances of genocide against a religious group. Regardless of classification, the legacy of the Albigensian Crusade is a grim testament to the complexities of faith, power, and the often harsh mechanisms used to enforce religious unity in medieval Europe.